We are now up to the fourth and final chapter of this Maamar. So let's begin chapter 4. Amnam Havayes Abaye v'Rava Nikra Davar Katan. But in contrast to the idea of understanding God's chariot, understanding how God is revealed in the world, and through coming to the realization, I guess, of the limits of like the angels, and in corresponding to the limits of our understanding, the limits of human intellect, the limits of any sort of system or model to grasp God, and even really the limits of creation to grasp and convey God. In contrast to that, Havayes Abaye v'Rava Nikra Davar Katan. The questions of Abaye and Rava is called a small matter. Dihine Iser Medish Rabba, it says Medish Rabba on Shemais, Parashat Lamed Gimel. Amar Rabbi Brechya Rebbe. That Rabbi said the name of Rabbi VeHaeir Eineinu. He said the name of Rabbi VeHaeir Eineinu. B'noyeg sheba'olam, the custom of the world is Adam meicher chafetz mitaych beisay v'hu atzav alav. A person sells something, one of his household belongings. First he decides, I'll get rid of it, get some cash, and then later he's upset. He has, seller's remorse that he wishes he had it back. V'kadosh baruch hu nasan entirely Yisrael v'hu samach hulu. In contrast, God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, and he rejoices. He's glad that we have it now. Shema Yochol Liknais Ba'olav Avakash Baruch Hu Nasan Torah Yisrael V'Amar Lahem Kaviyachol Liatem Leichim. The custom of the world is that when a person goes to the market and he buys something, you think that by buying that he's able to get the owner with it. No, he gets the object. I think that's the meaning. But in contrast, God, when he gives the Torah to the Jewish people, he's saying that, so to speak, by taking the Torah, by getting the Torah, you're getting me. That he's giving himself over with the Torah. That through the Torah, we get connection to the very essence of the infinite light, the light of the infinite one, blessed be he. And I think it's maybe worth just pausing for a moment to talk about, so there's the idea of light is the idea of revelation or expression. The infinite light is basically the idea that God is Kol Yachol. He can do whatever he wants. He's not limited. He has infinite possibilities. Sometimes when we say the term Ar Ein Sof Baruch Hu, you can speak about the light is infinite, which means that there's no end to how it can be expressed, or you could say it's the light of the infinite one. And usually I believe when it says Baruch Hu like this, is saying the light of the infinite one, and blessed be he, we're saying about that it's the revelation of God's very essence. So not just the revelation of his infinite ability, but the revelation of the source of that infinite ability of the infinite one, blessed be he. V'hine, lekicha hi al yedei beis yad. So generally when you take something, when you take some sort of container or vessel, you take it from its handle. And the handle is really something that's secondary or separate from the actual thing itself. If you have a cup that has a handle like a mug, you can really break the handle off and it still functions as a cup, or the same thing with other kind of utensils. And so too spiritually, the concept of grasping, taking an intellectual idea, the way that that can be transferred or given over from one person to another, from a teacher to a student, is through letters, through language. So language is really separate from the idea. You can convey the same idea in any language. You don't need it to be specifically in English or in Hebrew or any specific language. It doesn't really, and as far as for the understanding itself, your mind doesn't really need any language. The language is a tool that helps you grasp the different ideas by naming things. It gives you a way to move those ideas, shuffle them around in your mind, and also convey them to others effectively. So it turns out that there's this relationship where language is only like a handle by which to grasp the ideas, but it's not the idea itself. And so too with the Torah. And so the handle that lets us take the Torah, grasp the Torah, is the fact that the Torah is expressed in human intellect and in logic and in physical laws. So that is really something that's just the language that allows us to grasp the Torah, but that's not really what the Torah is. That's not the essence of the Torah. The Torah is not logic and reasoning, and it's not even these laws. It's not just a codification of law. This is the idea of that it's being grasped through something else. And I think the idea is that the real essence of the Torah is a connection to God. It's an awareness of godliness and helping us find that godly part within ourselves, within other people, within everything in the world, and learning to interact on that level. And the explanations and the laws are just to help train us and train our minds and our feelings and our habits so that we'll be able to tune into that aspect of ourselves and the world. That's one of the reasons I believe the Torah starts with stories, because really the essence of the Torah is that there are these godly people. There's Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and all these other great people, and they live this godly life, or they had this godly perspective, and now we're trying to emulate them. But how do you teach somebody to be like that? So these are the explanations to help give us that perspective and the different types of laws and habits that will get us habituated to have this right kind of mind frame and approach things in a way that will let us learn to live in that kind of way. But the essence of it is something that's really beyond any of those explanations. And that's, by the way, one of the reasons why the oral law is something that really can't be written down. There's certain types of information that is impossible to codify. It's impossible to explain. Like you can't explain what it's like to see a color. You have to experience it. So the real essence of the Torah is this godly experience, which is possible because we have this godly spark in our soul that we can tune into that and see things through that lens. And it's something that really is beyond any specific explanation. The explanations can just be helpful ways of dealing with it and grasping it and conveying it. And so this is the deeper idea that the questions of Abai and Rava, in other words, the whole discussion of the Talmud, is called a small thing. I guess the idea that it's the idea of that logical framework and the legal aspect of the Torah is in order to bring something great down and make it tangible and accessible. In contrast, so we said Ma'aser Merkava makes us aware of our limitations and this never-ending need to grow and see beyond the limitations of our understanding and our models and our logic. And in contrast, the concept of the Talmud and the codification of those laws is to bring this essence and bring it down into something that is graspable and something that people can relate to that aren't necessarily on that higher level. And I guess that's the idea that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had both of these things, that he was able to appreciate completely the limitations of understanding and intellect and have that sense of wonder and humility. And at the same time, he was also able to find ways of being very practical to bring these things down into explanations or into customs and laws and habits that would make it accessible to everybody. I guess that's the idea that we're conveying here. The Torah hi hamshacha atzmis me atzmas ein sof baruch hu, that the Torah is really this essential transfer from the very essence of the Infinite One, blessed be He. That God is giving us Himself. He's giving us this connection to, and this is really something that's just implanted into our souls beyond the explanation. But this connection to God is limited and brought down to very small things. And so it came down into these physical laws and all the little minutia of the laws of Shabbos and Tefillin and Tzitzis and all these kind of things. And so too the mitzvahs are all physical things. Tefillin, beklaf, hagashmi. The tefillin is something we do with the physical parchment. Betzitzis, betzemer hagashmi, and the tzitzis is with the physical wool. Sukkah, bischach, gashmi, and we make a sukkah out of physical shade coverings of whatever it is, bamboo or something, or sort of leaves, branches. V'derech mashal shebelulav, bitzmachim gashmim. V'dalin minim, and the four species of the lulav are of the physical branches and fruits that we use for the four species. And so too with the gifts to the Kohanim and the tithes and the different sacrifices, all of those are physical things. And so in every mitzvah, there's many, many minute details of the law. Based on what was decreed by God's wisdom and His will, and everything is very very precise and very limited. In other words, it's very codified into this very specific formula of how to do things. And so this is the idea, excuse me, that there's these two aspects of the Torah there is the inner essence of the Torah, which is this connection to God. And then in order for us to have a handle to connect to it, it's brought down into these very small things that make it relatable and accessible to everybody. But those are very limited and very, they're physical and they're very formalized. VeHaeir Eineinu, and this is actually what makes it possible to have this transfer. Because the Torah mitzvahs are the real essence of God's desire. That's why they are expressed in something that's very tangible and very specific. Like we see in a person, and like we see that with a person, there's these two things. There's where a person is giving over his essence and just giving over an intellectual thing, which is an idea. Ideas can be theoretical and can be abstract, but giving over a person's essence, usually like the analogy for that is in childbirth. So that is where in childbearing, a person is giving over their very essence, and that is expressed in something physical. Because the intellect is only giving over a ray, it's only giving over like one way of looking at things. So in other words, ideas that any understanding or any intellectual model or any sort of system is not inherently true. It's just one way of conveying the truth, one way of relating to it, but it's not something essential. But when you're giving over the real essence, you're giving over the very essence of like in childbirth, you're giving the child the essence of the ability to think and the essence of the ability to feel emotions and empathy. You're not just teaching them a specific skill or tool. You're giving them the very essence of what it means to be alive and to be conscious and to have the ability to learn and to grow. And so that is something that's much deeper. And you're giving over the real essence of the soul that even transcends these different faculties, to the point where the child can even exceed the revealed capabilities of the parent. So it's possible for the child to develop their intellect and emotions and skills in a way that's even beyond what the parent had. So it's not. So here you're clearly not giving them a specific skill, you're giving them the very essence. Nevertheless, we see that intellect, which is lower, that's expressed through speech. But to give over the essence, that is through reproduction, which is a physical transfer. The physical transfer of the seed from the father to the mother, that is something from the husband to wife. That's something that is a physical thing, and that specifically in something physical that contains the essence. And you see this also in teaching, that you can explain a theory, but in order for somebody to really understand it, it has to be grounded in some sort of experience. You have to give them a physical interaction with the idea, and then the explanations will mean something. So we see that essence is conveyed specifically in the physical. And the same thing with the Torah. Because God is not just giving us specific laws, he's trying to, the idea of the Torah is giving us this very essence of being godly. So in order to transfer that essence, it can't just be conveyed in an explanation. It has to be conveyed in an experience. Therefore, it comes in these physical things through physical experiences. That's where you're able to reveal and cultivate that essential thing of what it means to be godly, and find that in yourself, and then be able to see that in others and things like that, and have the true Torah perspective. There are many examples of this that we see physically. For example, if you have a signet ring where there's like some sort of symbol, but it's engraved in a gemstone. So because there's not a lot of contrast in the gemstone, because it's very clear, let's say it's like a diamond, and you grave letters in there, it'd be very hard to read. Because it's so clear, you can't read the letters that are engraved into it. And the only way to read it is if you stamp it onto wax. And so we see that there are certain things that you can't see when it's in a very abstract way. You have to see it in a tangible thing, then you can really appreciate what's there. But if the stone is not transparent, so then you could read the letters that are engraved in the stone itself. You don't need to. So you see that when something is like more, I guess the idea of being transparent here is being more pure and in a higher level, it can't be appreciated, the potential that's there can't be appreciated until it comes into some sort of physical counterpart. Amnam kasher hu even hamafik yevshar likra yaisos chukim ba'ikiyem al shaiva. But if it's clear, if it's a clear gem, you have to imprint it into wax in order to read it. Nimtza de bedavar habilti bahir mavik yevshar liyes agili bikirov el mekairai ki im berichukei davka. So it comes out that this looks like that this might be a mistake. Let's see, might be a typo. In footnote 59, it says, this is the way it's written in the original manuscript, but it was printed a little differently. There it says, Nimsash b'davar bilti bar mavik yachal liyas eskalos bekerov el makarei b'davar mav here umavik yevshal liyas skili bekerov el makarei kiyem berichlik davka. Yeah, so the corrected version of this is that it comes out that if something is not so clear or so pure, then it can be revealed, it can be expressed in a like as it is in its original form. In other words, the entirety of it can be conveyed much more directly. But something that is more pure or more pristine or clear, it's impossible for it to be expressed, conveyed in this direct way where you're close to the source. It has to be conveyed through something that is far from it. And so for certain things that are very deep or abstract, you need to have an analogy or some sort of physical experience to appreciate the distinction, and it's not good enough just to explain it. You have to have experience with it. And this is understood also in the corresponding in godliness and the analog to it says, our sages, or there's it says in Talmud Yerushalmi and other places that the seal of God is truth. And this is like what it says in the verse in Yeshaya, that I am first and I am last, and without me there is no God. And also it's maybe worth noting that it says the word Elokim, which implies, that name implies like the whole structure of the process of creation and nature and all those things. That from beginning to end, God's the one that creates this whole system for spiritually and physically for how the universe is going to work. And also at the very end, God is the one that decides how all of those systems, all those laws of nature are going to be actualized into the physical world that we see. And the laws of nature and all those things don't really, they kind of help describe what's going on, the patterns, but they don't actually define, they're not the source of what's defining what's happening. They're just a system to help organize it, so to speak. And this is implied by the word emes, which means truth itself. That the word emes is the first letter, the middle letter, and the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which implies that it's something that remains constant without changing from the beginning to the middle to the end. VeHaeir Eineinu, and it says elsewhere, our sages say that there's no truth other than Torah. The real idea of truth is not just, again, intellectual truth, it's the idea of having this awareness of godliness, and that's being maybe expressed through some idea, but without that inner thing, it's not really true. And also Torah is the idea of giving some sort of guidance to our lives as people. And so we can create intellectual models, but the universe doesn't really care about our models and our mathematics and all those kind of things. Sometimes they're good approximations of reality. Sometimes they're not so good. We have to improve them. But the way that we choose to look at it and the way we choose to create these models is really ultimately based on, because that's a useful way for people to think about it. And it's really, the whole purpose of that exercise is more than really understanding the universe itself. It's really finding a model that will help us in how we interact with it, and be able to create technology that's useful, or be able to predict what's going to happen in a useful way, and so we can plan what we're going to do. And so that's the idea that Torah is really about understanding who we are and how to bring advice and guidance to people. And that's really the source of any truth in any other field as well, including like all the sciences. That specifically through Torah, it's revealed this idea that it says that the truth of God is for the world, like we said previously, that that's the idea of God being revealed specifically within the world. And this expression is specifically in something that's far, that seems detached from the infinite possibility of God's infinite light. Hainu Kameshin is Labsha B'Devarim Gashmim Davka. It's expressed specifically in very physical things. VeHaeir Eineinu al Mailoso Madregasa Atzmi. And that, the very fact that it's being expressed through physical experiences, that the Torah is coming down to physical mitzvahs, that really shows that it's coming from a much more essential place. We're not just it's not just about, some theory or some model. It's really something that's true and that's essential. V'yuvan zeh mimasha anuroyim. In other words, if the Torah was just a philosophy, then you could just explain it and you could just learn about it in a theoretical way, but it wouldn't really have that truth to it. The fact that it's something that's really true and really real means it's something you have to experience. And through that, that's really what gives the meaning to those words and the philosophy and the explanations. Otherwise, they're just words. And this can be understood from what we see in ourselves with the powers in our soul, our faculties, to Re'iyah. And so now we're going back to what we talked about in the very beginning of the Maamar. What's the idea of seeing and hearing? To Re'iyah hi l'mayla mishmiya, that the faculty of seeing is qualitatively superior to hearing. Kasher adam shemeya eza davar umevin eisei davana zu hima shenaisa kinyan b'nafshay. That when a person hears something, and it seems like here he's talking about when somebody hears an explanation, when he describes something to somebody, and they understand it, and that understanding means that it's really being internalized into their soul. The person really gets it, and they see it in themselves. But when you see it, it's completely different. So you can learn about something in theory and hear about it and understand it and study it, but when you actually experience it, it gives you a qualitatively much greater appreciation of what it is, and it's something that's much more impactful in yourself, and it leaves a much deeper impression. And this is the idea that hearing something, which is, I think he's again focusing on the idea of like hearing an explanation, you're just getting the mitzias, which is the idea of the external relationships of the thing. But when you see something, which is seeing here, I believe is in general just the idea of experiential, anything's experiential, that's where you really grasp the essence of it. That's where you really get the qualitative thing. And like you see, that you could explain to somebody colors and the relationships between different colors, but if you don't see the color, you're never really grasping what it is. You can understand that there are all these different wavelengths of light and how they interact. If you mix this with that, it's going to get this color. You could have that whole framework, but seeing it is a completely different thing. And that's the way it is with experiencing all kinds of things. And with things that can be both heard and seen, so you can describe and hear about the spiritual characteristics of it, but seeing is something that when you see it, you're seeing the physical thing. The yidua, and so we see that again, there's this quality that the experience of something physical is much more real and much more deep than the ideas that are expressed spiritually that can be described. And this is also like in sciences. This is why experimentation is the source of truth. If you can make a theory and a hypothesis, but the experiments are where you're actually seeing it in the real world, and that's the ultimate source of truth. The yidua, the re'iyah, the chachma, hu b'chinas pinimis va'atzmus ha'chachma, uba davka lamata yeser u'kumai havaya b'chachma yasar arts. And this is the idea in godliness, this idea that seeing, it says, comes from chachma, from wisdom, and this is the idea that the real inner essence of this re'iyah of chachma, this idea of having a direct perception of something, that's the real inner essence of chachma, is when it's in a direct experience. That's called the koyachma and things like that. And that inner power of chachma, even though that's like the deepest type of understanding, that is something that comes all the way down to the physical, and that's like it says that God founded the world, the physical earth, with chachma, with wisdom. In other words, he implanted that idea of that deeper truth that we can have a direct experience of in the physical world. V'zeu b'reishis bar Elokim, and this idea that it says that in the beginning God created, the reishis b'spheres hu b'chinas chachma, the reishis, some of the commentators actually don't translate Bereshis as in the beginning. They translate it as with wisdom. With wisdom, God created the heavens and the earth. Because Bereshis is the idea of the first of the faculties, and that's the highest faculty, the highest of the godly spheros is Chachma. Bereshis nami maimerhu, and like it says that Bereshis is also one of the 10 utterances that's creating the world. And I think the idea of that is that even the Chachma itself is something that's being like created by God. I think that's the idea that he's saying. But let's see. Uksiv, and like it says in Micha Vav Beis, VeHaeir Eineinu, that so a sonim can mean like bedrock, or it can refer to, people too. But yeah, I think here it's the bedrock, which is the foundation of the earth. And the sonim, it says, is a similar letters to Tanoim, that refers to the Tanoim. To Eretz hu bechinas Torah sheba'al peh, that the land, the idea of Eretz is the idea of the oral law, which again is bringing the Torah down into the physical world where we can experience it. The Esonim aises Tanoim, and the Esonim, this bedrock, is the idea of the same letters as Tanoim, the scholars, the sages of the Mishnah that taught the Torah. That what their role was they were the founders and the ones that expressed and revealed the Torah Sheba'al Peh, which, like we said, the real thing that they did is that they took this godly wisdom, which was something that was more experiential, and they found ways of codifying it so that it's something that could be conveyed and expressed to people that maybe, especially, there was the diaspora was starting and they weren't going to be immersed in that kind of culture, and how do you keep that alive and convey it to people through, and so they codified all of these customs and laws and practices and the logic of also how to think about it in order to help convey that. And it came specifically in these physical laws. They didn't write philosophy books to convey those ideas. It was specifically through the practices and the customs. This is why the questions of Abai and Rava, which, like we said, is the whole Talmud, the whole oral law, that's called a small thing. It's the idea of taking godliness and bring it down into these little things, into physical things that can then be conveyed. And this is similar to how it says that God condensed, so to speak, his presence between the two poles that were attached to carry the ark, the Aron, where the luchos were. In other words, God took his essence and he conveyed it in the physical laws that were expressed in the Aron Kodesh, in the Torah that was in the ark. This idea of the tzimtzum, unlike in other cases, a tzimtzum sometimes means that the light is being removed or that it was being diminished. But that's not the case here. Here it means that the entire essence is being conveyed in a physical form. That God condensed and implanted his entire essence into this place, even though it's so small and seemingly is incapable of conveying that essence. But he chose to put it there and give us the ability that through these simple experiences of the Torah and mitzvahs, we're able to connect to God's essence. And therefore the oral law is called a small thing. That it means that it's something that's made for a small person or for a child. I think that's the idea. Or here he's translating a little bit differently, for somebody that is humble. Because studying Torah has to be with that, and I guess it's related with this kind of like childlike sense of humility, that we have to realize how limited we are, how small we are, and then we can accept the Torah. And this bittul has to be where we feel that we're totally transparent, we're totally don't have our own desires or being, that we're here just as a vehicle to convey godliness. Like it says, that when we learn Torah, we have to be, like it says, that let my tongue answer your words, that we have to feel that we're just repeating the words of God. Like we're just answering, God is saying it, and we're repeating after him. It shouldn't be that we're here to invent our own ideas. We have to just seek to understand and as accurately as possible convey, even if we're explaining it or expressing it in our own words, to just express what is conveyed there. And if we come with that sincere desire to just understand and convey what is being said, like a small child that isn't yet ready to invent their own things, then we'll really understand it and get the true depth of it. If we prematurely try to impose our own understanding, then it's really going to bring laziness and sloppiness to our understanding, and it's going to twist and pervert what it's saying. Then we can bring the truth of God into the world, which brings healing to the world, like we said before, the idea of the world is this concealment of godliness, and we can remove that and allow truth to be seen in the world, despite that it's a physical, material place. We'll be able to see past that and see the truth of God and in ourselves and in everything. Amnam b'chtei shetia ha'avayda b'nefesh v'tayra sheyiyu b'madregas ner hameir chayshach ha'olam hu ha'yedei tshuva dafka. But in order for us to be able to study Torah and be a candle that's able to enlighten the darkness of the world, we have to first do the avodah of tshuva. We first have to have the sense of needing to be feeling that where we are now is inadequate. We have to grow, we have to improve, and that's what gives us that openness to study Torah with that humility that's necessary. To us, magiyim el tachlis hamula, only then will we achieve the true ultimate purpose and goal of studying Torah and serving God and all these things. And so this is what we said, that it's the idea of the ultimate thing is VeHaeir, that the word VeHaeir is the same as the word echad, which means one, God's oneness, but the letter aleph becomes a vav and the ches becomes an ayin through these different types of substitutions. And so this idea that there's these two aspects of how we relate to God's unity. There's the upper unity, which is the idea that there's really, from God's perspective, he's the only true reality. Everything is just an expression, an extension of him. But that's something that, and really, he has infinite possibilities. He could have created the world totally differently. He could do whatever he wants, and we're just experiencing one small, minute possibility of everything that God could do. But so we can have that awareness, but at the end of the day, we're living down here in this world, and we are limited to time and space, even though God created time and space, and it didn't have to be this way, but that's where we are. And so we have to live within that reality. And so appreciating how we see godliness within the limits of our reality, that's the lower unity. And that's the idea that the fact that our limited world has this sense of eternality to it, that's the VeHaeir, that shows that it's coming from this higher place of echad. That's something, the true, like this transcendent unity is expressed in something being infinite, being constant and eternal. V'akavana, d'madregas VeHaeir ta'olam shehu b'chinas chodata yeh gam ken hamshacha v'agili d'madregas yuchadila. And so this is the idea that we want to, even though we're only experiencing God's unity in the level of VeHaeir within the world, but we should have within that the realization and appreciation that it's expressing this higher unity of God's essence, and be able to see that in our world. And again, that's something that if we look even at the world itself, we're able to see that yes, it's limited to certain things, but it itself points to us and shows to us, reveals to us that those limits are not really there, and it's really coming from this more infinite place. And this is now back to the beginning of the Maamar. This is the meaning of the what we say in our prayer, VeHaeir Eineinu b'sarasecha, enlighten our eyes with your Torah. Remember, we asked why is it specifically our eyes? Seemingly it's something that you understand and something that you see. That being that the Torah is expressed in these logical, laws that are something that are intellectual. Hine habakasha ha'aras heinayim l'haskal l'hasig. So we're requesting, we shouldn't just understand Torah intellectually. We're asking it to be something that we see. And the idea of seeing is having that direct experience of appreciating the true source of the Torah, the luminary of the Torah, which is the godliness of the Torah. And that's something that we see, and it's something that we have to experience directly. And we experience it both in the physical mitzvahs, and then that gives us this awareness and appreciation and experience of something that transcends even the intellectual and this direct godly experience. So to the mitzvahs are expressed in physical things. So we're asking God that we shouldn't just be doing the mitzvahs externally with our physical limbs, but our heart should be attached to the mitzvahs. Then when we do the mitzvahs, we do it with this inner life. It's something that we feel is relevant to us. This is really who we are, and it's a completely different type of experience as opposed to just doing something that we're told to do, that we have to do. We shouldn't just look at it as that way. We should look at this as expressing and giving us a connection to something that's deeper and richer and more meaningful and really at the very core of our being. Then we can have this unification of the two parts of our heart. The godly soul is able to refine and clarify the animal soul. That even our animal soul should see the relevance, be drawn close to godliness, which means seeing that godliness is something that's relevant to us in our lives. V'hanosh Bahamas Gerim Ili Benefshel Kiss, and then the animal soul, like we said with the relationship of the divine, the Markava, that the angel, so to speak, lift up the throne. So too the animal soul says lifts up the godly soul. That through the godly soul elevating and refining the animal soul, then the godly soul itself becomes elevated to a higher level, which I think is this idea that it's able to gain this direct experience of godliness, which is through the physical, as opposed to just having it be an abstract idea. And we won't be embarrassed in this world. We won't be ashamed of the world to come. And then we won't stumble, which is, our sages say, is the idea of having to come back and be reincarnated, or have our mission be continued. We'll be able to completely fulfill our mission. And this is then will complete the ultimate purpose of our divine service, which is that even in VeHaeir, which is the idea of how godliness is revealed in the world, we should be able to, which is this lower perspective of that we have down here, we should be able to see and have this godly unity of Echad, the upper unity of God, should be expressed to us and see it in the physical world itself. And that's the conclusion of the Maamar. So now that we've finished that, I'm going to go back and next time and work on outlining all the main points and try to really see the flow and see the themes, and then we'll work on seeing how we can apply that.